Hello and welcome to this special webcast of the International Petroleum Technology Conference, IPTC. Today's session is the second part of the IPTC Society Tours. My name is Imad Gara. I'm the Global Flow Assurance Lead for Baker Hughes, together with Eric Dulamit, who is the General Manager, IFP Technology. We are the chairs of the top paper session. The IPTC top paper session is a special session featuring the top papers from the conference sponsored association, namely the Association of Petroleum Geologists, the European Association of Geoscientists and Engineers, EAGE, the Society of Exploration Geologists, SEG, and the Society of Petroleum Engineers, PE. Today we listen to two top papers from Giorgio, Paola, and Geir Karlsen, presenting their selected paper as top papers on various industry topics. Before we start the presentation, I would like to highlight that you will have the opportunity to have a Q&A session with the speakers. The live Q&A session will be held on Wednesday, 10th of March from 1 p.m. Kuala Lumpur time, which is the UTC plus 8 hours. You start posting your questions today via the comments section. We will compile your questions to be addressed during the Q&A live session on Wednesday, 10th of March. Now I would like to welcome Giorgio Paola to give his presentation. Giorgio is the Reservoir Engineering Advisor with Repsol. He will deliver his speak on reinforcement learning for field development policy optimization. Welcome, Giorgio.
Hi, my name is Giorgio Paola, and I'm a reservoir engineer in Repsol Tech Lab. I will introduce the paper Reinforcement Learning for Field Development Policy Optimization. I'm thankful for the possibility to present this work as one of the Society Top Paper 2020. Before starting, I'd like to acknowledge the work of the co-authors from the Tech Lab and IBM Watson Laboratory, and Repsol for the support in research with the net carbon neutrality in 2050. In this presentation, I review the goals and justification of this work. With a very simple example, I review the advantages of introducing sequential decision-making in E&P. I'll focus then in the application to a real reservoir and provide some validation to the results achieved before wrapping up with a conclusion. I will not enter in the details of the implementation, rather focus on the reason to introduce this new framework. I'm interested in extending this collaboration outside Repsol to generate a community working on AI for asset optimization. Here in the first page, I'm providing my personal details. Please reach out if you have any conclusion or if you want to join. For people listening about field development plan optimization for the first time, the scope is to optimize the well location, type, schedule, well control to maximize or minimize a certain utility function. Often this is related to a production KPI or an economic like a net present value. But at operational level, it boils down to the question, where do I drill my next well? Well, despite the simple question, the answer might not be that straightforward. We can face two types of reasoning. One that we call static reasoning, where we optimize all action at once, and that is our standard asset optimization. Or a sequential one where first we act, then we observed, we act again, and then we observed, and this is actually the proposed framework. This can become easier to understand with an example. So we do not know what the subsoil looks like, provided we only have a partial view of it through the data that we have achieved, right? So this has as a consequence that we need a set of realization to forecast its possible future behavior. So if we look at an example like the one here, where we have a 10 realization to describe the subsoil, they are all different, and we can consider the yellow area as sand, so value 1, and the blue area as shale, so value 0. If I decide where to place my well, I will probably try to maximize the area in average where the yellow is. So looking in the average map, I will place the well as a picture, right? And I will sum them up as value, average, and I will get a value of 2. Now, we have a different perspective, a sequential reasoning. What is the idea? We can place a first well, and then we can observe. If we act, for example, in position 1, 1, we observe in certain realization 1 and in certain realization 0. Means that we can validate or disprove some of the realization that we have identified. So my understanding after the first action has changed. I had a feedback from my reservoir. So why should I not use this for my next decision? My second well, we will place knowing what the actual state of the reservoir. Therefore, we build up a tree of decision and a tree of action, observation that maximize my future outcome. Right? So we can solver to compute this tree of action for us, and we can have a value of 3.1 on average. Tree can be expected. We can see here two possible for example, the one on the top and the one left. If you see, the first will be placed again in this, but depending on what is my belief state by drilling the file and getting observation, then I will place next wells in different positions. So decision making is indeed an interesting frame for field optimization, not only because it improves the actual economic indicator, but also because it's an interesting property with respect to uncertainty and data. In terms of propagation, for example, that is extremely. If we have a set of realization that really bimodal behavior, an expected net present value, so an average net present value put across the realization, we provide a similar decision criteria. So what I will have is to have enough simulated to be able to falsify at some of the realization, and this data could be of any type. Could be a production test if we keep producing more, be a seismic, it could be a well log. What's interesting about this framework is reconcile the planning, the long-term plan, with the surveillance. We can identify value of the information of those we are having, and enough variety of the realization, then we can identify decision that can break some of our threats, so we can have the reactive decision making. It's very interesting framework to be used for. Now, what is reinforcement learning? Reinforcement learning is about finding the best sequence of action, create the optimal outcome value. The concept of an agent, decision maker, that is interactive with an environment is the field. As an action or decision action is that change of the reservoir, dynamic feedback based on the production, collecting a certain is our value. The learning process readjust and modify that they are going to be taken as the future of the MPV. Reward the state that we have in a and we call it value. The reward state onwards. So we can as a brain that takes states into the action, so the policy. Policy can be represented by a network that stores the state. In this case, we are an agent, the top right corner. We are approximating our learning forecast. Here I'm a glossary that you use and review, and are the key for work with respect to reinforcement. So let's look at our use case. We want to optimize a field that they define as a field A based on maximize its net present value, and then locate two infill wells, producer or one injector, given that we have already two producer and one injector. If we see the reservoir, it has a non-trivial structure. It's an anomaly, it has a strong aquifer, it's a sealing fault, so it's not a synthetic case. And the action space, it will be a decision to producer and injector or thing. We have a well control for wells and target wells, and we identify that our decision is at the timing of 30 days. We are constrained on where to wells based on saturations. We have a well distance to respect and upper limit for the well control. We optimize based on with an analytical formula. One interesting point here that we are approximating our source model with a new is a sequence-to-sequence network. You can see here the actually allows us to run off simulation in a very short, very high accuracy. So what is simulation here? We have a meaning of an agent and an evaluation, which is basically agent is learning. All the process of convert, call it a curve, because it's how they're learning from his experience. The blue points, actual point that he has evaluated, is quite enough. There is quite a good exploration and the red curve, a moving average that shows an action. These points and we diagram, we see that there is a towards the high net present value. Toward the value, we plot in a map how the location for producer is in the top of the reservoir and in regions where the water can be located. Now, how can we the DRL has performed actively, right? So here we came in what we define the what if analysis. We review all the possible combinations we can have locating a producer and injector with the reservoir that we have. we can get about 600,000 simulations. So we can actually manage and work with force and use a massive development scenario evaluation using our proxy model. It won't take about 8 hours. So if we run all the whole simulation, then we mark again, like it was done previously, an histogram of net present value. And again, if we clip in the simulation, we have that DRL with a much lower number of simulations. It gets equal, slightly better results than what we have in the force analysis. So this is very positive because you see how a proxy model support this type of new workflow. Second, because the DRL with very much little number of simulation is able to give high performances. Now, building this, we also map all the possibility in a map of net value. We locate again the producer and then injectors. We can replicate the we had previously done with the DRL. So if we look at the conclusion of this work, Deep Learning for Planning is a comprehensive work capable of optimizing a development policy, location, and under uncertainty. Uncertainty propagation is inherent in the partial observable formulation, and it is the bridge between a surveillance and planning optimization workflow. The environment for DRL agent can be run using a model for reservoir simulation, and this really enhances the capability of this work. I'm open now to the question, so thank you very much for your audience.
Thank you very much, Giorgio, for your great presentation. Next, I would like to welcome Mr. Geir Karlsen to deliver his presentation on preventing the next well control events, a learning indicator approach. Geir has about 30 years of oil and gas experience, and he is the founder of Deep Ocean LLC.
Hello, thank you for joining us today. I will present an SP paper, Preventing the Next Well Control Event, a Leading Indicator Approach. The paper was written by Dr. Tamim, Gert van Lopik, and myself, Geir Karlsen, author. And I will present that to you today, and thank you for attending. A little bit about the background and why we're here. Over the years, seen numerous industrial disasters, not just in upstream, in downstream, not just in wells, all types of industries with stored energy. Unfortunately, they're happening over and over again, and that is really the sad thing. Very good at learning. We keep repeating the mistakes over and over again. I listed some of the main industrial disaster years, and you will find a common denominator called leading indicators. There were blinking lights, private incident, and there were degradation of barriers that should have been noticed. And that's why we are here. That's what we are talking about, and that's why we need to talk about leading indicators as we move forward. This is why we need to understand the red flags. We have warning lights. They're right in front of us as engineers designing programs, designing processes, as well as the operators at the coalface, and not last but not the least, the leadership in the corporations. They all need to understand leading indicators and the impact of leading indicators and how we can use leading indicators to prevent the next big disaster. Why or the history of the project, I reached out in 2018 to Texas A&M. I knew they had a process safety center. I met Jim Pettigrew and Dr. Nafis Tamim. Dr. Tamim was doing his PhD at the time, and his research was in leading indicators in well control. So I pretty much hit the jackpot right out of the gate. We talked about how to move this forward, and we ended up engaging the industry through an industry conference. We had numerous workshops and get-togethers. We also got great leadership and engagement from Bessie on the project, and as well as great engagement by companies dealing with process safety. So we had a good team together, and we made some good progress. Key points agreed on by industry. One was there was certainly a consensus on the importance of leading indicators and how important it was to develop a leading indicators dashboard. The need for statement of requirements was obviously we've done that. There's probably still some work to be done on the SOR. And the endpoint is to develop a customizable dashboard, so a leading indicator dashboard that we can use to understand and see in real time how our barriers and how our safeguards are behaving and performing. We're not trying to reinvent the wheel. We like to leverage on the industry and the private efforts. We are not just here to collect more data. Others can do that. Let's talk about some key drivers in safety in wells. Number one is kick detection. Kick detection systems are complex. We are drilling more complex wells, more difficult wells. We're using underbalanced drilling with more complex engineering, more complex equipment. We are dealing with the information overload. We are drilling in deeper water. Are we using all the tools available to us, for example, in the tool basket? Are we cutting costs so we are not able to access the tools and the equipment we need? Do we know our barriers and what to look out for? Are barriers degrading and failing? These are all important factors in the kick detection system. Lagging indicators are incapable of revealing barrier weaknesses. We've seen that every time we have an incident. They do not give us indication of potential events. They are just like watching your rear view mirror in your car. You watch behind you to see what happened, but they are not really forward looking. And the incident have already taken place. A good example, I think, is the Deepwater Horizon back in 2010, April 20, 2010, when the crew was receiving a safety award for good safety performance. And we know what happened the evening of the same day, evening of April 20, where we had the disaster on board the Deepwater Horizon. So process safety and leading indicators were not part of that conversation. Process safety practices and guidelines, they have not really been applicable to well operations, although I think it's getting better. Their primary focus in the past has been on downstream, on refineries, process operations, and addressing production-related losses. Emphasis has been on a consequence-based approach rather than a cost-based approach that we would like to see in leading indicators. Risk assessment in wells, for example, has its HACCPs. They have historically not included leading indicators. We have not been really good at understanding, using and tracking leading indicators. All of the red lights have been blinking in the past, and this needs to change. Our team believes that the industry needs a comprehensive framework to assess the entire well control system and take actions to understand the cumulative risk and how we can use leading indicators in well control and use leading indicators in other industries dealing with stored energy. Here's a couple of graphs showing cumulative risk. One is for the Deepwater Horizon blowout and the other one is for the Montara blowout. You could add the Oklahoma prior trust in the middle of this and it would look exactly the same. But the key here is to review the entire well construction process and develop a keen understanding of well control risk and use that and monitor the left-hand side of the bow tie and develop a system like we are proposing with leading indicators that we can monitor in real time the left-hand side of the bow tie. That would be a great step ahead. Here we see an example of the bow tie. You've probably all seen that in the past. In the middle you have the undesirable event, so in our case a well-controlled event. On the right hand side you have the what I call the response side of the bow tie. On the left hand side you have the prevention side, and that's really the important part of the bow tie. The prevention side, we want to prevent an incident from ever happening again. So we list all the different risks in the bow tie, for example, the well kick, and then you put in various barriers that you can put in place for a well kick. And then you look at each barrier and see what are the potential degrading factors that could hamper your operation. The key here is to have a bow tie system that is dynamic. That means you develop the bow tie, and throughout the operation you look at the bow tie, you update the bow tie, because you know the risks are changing, barriers may be changing, you may be adding new barriers, or things are changing. So that's why making a bow tie dynamic is so important. If you keep it static, you're not going to capture changes in the risk and changes in the barriers as you move forward in operation. Here is the four-step process in developing sets of leading indicators. It starts with identification of initiating cause of barrier failure, identification of the associated barrier elements, and the influencing factors from operations, and last but not the least, the organizational factors, which are much more difficult to pinpoint and to identify. The end game is to develop this into the real-time indicators and showing the short-term or instantaneous measures, and then identify the longer-term, the traditional sets of leading indicators. And that brings us into the next slide, which is work at Texas A&M, where the 2021 R&D program includes leading indicators in well control. So part of that is develop the organizational factors, understand how the organizational factors play in, and together with the operational performance indicators, develop the leading indicator system and feed those into a predictive model that needs to be built, where the predictive models, you need to be able to weigh the various leading indicators, and then you output those into a live dashboard, a traffic light system. Where do we go from here? We have to re-engage industry in the development of the dashboard, where leading indicators could be used in well control and be tracked and displayed, and provide early warning sign through a traffic light system. That is the end game of what we are talking about. And we have to implement the four-step process to be able to build the model, build the predictive model, and build the output into the traffic light system, and integrate the process safety components to identify and define leading indicators based on a wide variety of factors that can be complex or can be less complex. But the key is collaboration with Texas A&M through an industry consortium arrangement. And for us, it's not really important who develops a dashboard or where it comes from, but it's really important that we get it developed, that we integrate it into operations, and we stop having all these industrial disasters that are really not necessary, but we need to do work and we need to use leading indicators as part of that. This slide shows the end game in the leading indicators dashboard development. It starts with the construction of bow ties and identification of failure mechanisms. The identification and definition following the four-step process we discussed, and the construction of a probabilistic model that inputs into the dashboard. And the key issue I think here is for the dashboard to be able to visualize for the user and show the colors and the status of the barriers. Are the barriers failing? Are they degrading, or are they staying static? Are they okay? That's a really important part, to really be able to show how barriers are changing and what the risks are changing. That's what we have. I'd like to acknowledge Dr. Nafis Tamim, Jim Pettigrew, Gert van Lopik, who wrote the paper and also who have been very active in promoting and working on the Leading Indicators project. So thank you for attending. Goodbye.
That was great presentation. Thank you very much, Geir. Big thank to our speakers for their insightful presentations. We hope you have enjoyed the session, and I would like to remind you that the live Q&A session will take place on 10th of March at 1 p.m. Kuala Lumpur time, which is the UTC plus 8 hours, streaming live across the IPTC social media. In the meantime, please visit 2021.iptcnet.org for more information about this and other activities of the conference. Thank you very much.